Hi, everyone. Welcome to Konveyor Meetup. So today we have Sunil Joshi, who from IBM, who will be presenting. Super excited about his content today. So before I hand it over to him, just a couple of reminders. So I will be sending out the slides and the recording out through the email list that you got this invite for. If you're not on Red Hat internal email list or in the Konveyor Google group yet, I'll put the link in the chat and just sign up through there. And then the second thing is, if you're in Red Hat internal email list and you want to keep getting invites to these meetups, make sure you sign up through that same link that's in the chat, because these email lists will only get the invite to the first meetup of the month, and that's it. And then third and final, if you have any lessons learned that you picked up from working on a migration project out in the field and you want to present to the rest of the community, let me know when we'll get you situated. We're always looking to learn more from practitioners that are out there doing the work. All right, so with that said, I'll hand it over to Sunil.
Thank you. Let me just start sharing my screen. Yep, I hope this is visible.
Yeah, okay. Sure, good to go, Sunil.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I appreciate everybody taking some time to join. The concept of cloud enablement, application modernization, platform modernization is something that's been near and dear to me. I've been working in this space for the past, I would say, about 8-10 years, and more, containerization in the recent 3-4 years, right? The more and more I have done this type of work, what I've come up to the realization that just doing myopic either containerization or any sort of modernization in and itself won't render the broader value that we all profess that a modernization transformation can provide. Therefore, I thought about putting some structure around even the thinking, right? Not just let alone the execution, but the thinking on what is relevant to modernize. What are some of the techniques to actually understand those relevance, including business criticalities? And then some of the techniques and the patterns that make sense, especially going into the cloud native world in terms of the technology patterns. Also associated models to evaluate those patterns. And then even when you look at those patterns, right? Are there other things, other engineering practices, other organizational constructs, team structures that actually add to the overall productivity and the value realization, right? And then how do you measure all of those things? So that's kind of the concept that I want to present today. So again, just in a nutshell, right? Why should we even modernize, and what are the things that are actually meaningful to be modernized, and how we measure? So with that, I'm going to start with a couple of things. One is, let's understand what are some of the market imperatives and the trends that even makes some of these modernization a actual necessity, right? It's not that it's needed, but it's an absolute necessity these days. So let's just look at a couple of exemplars from a business expectation standpoint, and then of course there are some technology trends that's even driving some of the business strategy, right? As always, there is increased financial pressures on many of our CIOs to actually reverse or move the IT spend to more of digital, as well as find user experience reinvention. That means we need more and more modern software, more and more modern applications that are nimble, that are flexible, and that are easily breakable and joinable again as necessary, or of a component-based services consumer model, right? The expectations are even more because for consumer-like experiences at workplaces, and consuming business applications wherever necessary, the need to consume best of breed solutions wherever they come from is gaining more and more relevant. What that means is you don't have to home grow every one of the business capabilities that you want to consume, right? as a SaaS solution or even an integrated solution as a service capabilities specific to industries are being made available. Industry platforms are gaining more and more relevance. So the thinking around consuming these capabilities, both from a cost and speed optimization standpoint, is it's not that easy because large enterprises have built up, I would say, inertia for doing these types of things. So when I say modernization, that includes not just the app part. I'm using the term app modernization just to get higher up the stack, so everything else is covered. Also includes the aspects of the ways of working, how we operate, right? Let's look at some of the technology trends. AI-driven optimization, DevSecOps, these are all things that we have been hearing from the past few years, but now it is becoming so much more relevant and necessary to, it is in the DNA and the fabric of how we actually develop, manage, and consume business capabilities through technology. Right, omni-channel experience, and I'll give you a concrete example of a client scenario and walk you through that, where people, the consumers today expect you start your process on A channel, you may be able to manage that in a B channel, and you may be want to maintain and have a user experience on a third type of a channel. That's practice. So you can read through some of these. I'm not going to read through every one of those. The other one that's very, very relevant, especially when I spoke about best of the breed solutions, as well as some of the native capabilities that our enterprises have, is the notion of the service integration. The integration modernization space, in my view, is the single largest, I would say biggest challenge in this whole journey of modernization to cloud and being cloud native and migration, right? At the end of the day, what we are trying to integrate is best of the breed solutions wherever they may happen, they may reside, as well as, the security compliances, audit requirements, those types of things make it even more stringent and difficult, because you have to combine all of these elements and still be cost effective and speed optimized. Okay. So with that, let's look at some specific industry, I would say, expectations. These are all exemplars, by the way. Nothing is, one of these are like examples of what I have seen personally, and some, I'm sure plenty of you in the audience would have seen as well, right? Think of, for example, a global airline, right? Optimize where you can in order to fund strategic priorities, maximize the funding in key areas. It's a very broad one. I'm giving examples of some really broad ones and some really like concrete ones and more granular ones, because this is how we see people ask for, right? At the end of the day, everybody has increased pressure for being agile, generating speed to value, cost optimize. All of these are things that folks want to do, right? There is a global bank that's in the need to integrate service management and application development capabilities for a seamless view of the end-to-end value chain. So again, that probably statement is coming from a CIO rather than from the business side. And you're going to have other things that come from the business side. I actually have hopefully we have time. I have a specific client scenario that I would like to walk through, starting all the way from the business problem articulation in applying in some of the models that I'm going to present today, right? So how do we make the expectations actionable now, right? I have three value drivers that I'm projecting over here is, the speed to market, some overall efficiency, and resiliency was sort of an afterthought some years ago, but an absolute necessity these days, because business capabilities are always expected to be up, zero downtime, and even when there is some degree of impact for some of the business capabilities, the auto healing and auto recovery type capabilities are expected to be delivered, right? So how do you make these expectations actionable? The old adage of people, process, and technology, it gets old, but it's actually very relevant, right? more and more self-contained, multi-skilled, integrated teams is what we are seeing when we speak through team modernization. Very concrete example I'll give you is in many of these manage of the application scenario, the first level of support, the L1 support, as we say, right? More and more multi-skilled full stack folks are being deployed. Therefore, using runbook automation and other types of capabilities, the level 1 person now is able to solve end-to-end many of those problems which would have otherwise gone to the deeper levels of the problem management systems. Therefore, just at the beginning itself, because of the level of robotics and automation, we are able to solve those. So the technology obviously is paramount in that. Also, some of the process modeling, we have to look at the process engineering aspect as well, right? User-centric design, high level of automation, that results in a highly efficient and responsive, quality process is what we need to look for. So how to make some of the expectations actionable? So there is modernization of the technology, of the processes, and some of the people and the team structures as well, right? So to deep dive into modernize in terms of what needs to be modernized. So it's important to understand not all applications or business capabilities that are transformed into technology capabilities, they are not alike. Okay, we can actually decompose them into so many different areas, but for the just for the ease of discussion, I'm submitting like 3 buckets, right? A core of our business capabilities that are mission critical, that drive the actual core transactional systems and other types of business critical, mission critical operations for our clients is what I'm calling as core, right? The practicality of that is most of these happen to be legacy applications for many of our large clients. Now, it's a different story for born on the cloud type applications, but if I look at top 100, top 50 of the clients that I have been servicing, right? 60-70% of them happen to be somewhat legacy. There is a little bit of technologies out there, right? The middle bucket is what I call as like the transient applications, which are like prime candidates for immediate modernization. I'll get to the left-hand side as well from a modernization standpoint, but it's a little bit more harder to do that, right? The middle bucket is prime candidates. We can prioritize them. A hybrid model is highly possible. Containerization into a Kubernetes type of an environment is highly possible, and therefore they are prime candidates. The other bucket is brand new development. There is no need for looking at a transformation path from that technology standpoint. Now, what needs to get modernized is mostly the skills, the way we operate, some of the team structures, and some of the engineering practices that makes it more appealing to actually embrace some of the cloud native development, right? It's very easy to pick a public cloud vendor. It's very easy to pick a containerization platform, OpenShift or otherwise. However, the necessary engineering skills and practices to pull that off is a lot more harder to accomplish. Therefore, the need for a enablement, a transformation of the measures itself, the way we operate, infusing some newer roles such as chaos engineers, SREs, and that type of stuff. So that level of changes will be necessary to govern and manage that bunch of applications, right? So anyway, so this is the lay of the land. This is typically what we see in our application estate. So this is a very simple view of how typically those types of applications are laid out in terms of, I would say, percentages. The only reason I'm projecting that is the middle one that we see, while the top one should really become more and more broader, but the middle one, which includes the aspects of the integration modernization that I spoke with, that should actually grow over time, and the core should actually decrease. What that means is, from a CIO standpoint, the dollar amounts that we spend on just maintaining the core, keeping the lights on type, dollars, that should get translated more into innovation dollars, which is on the top. That's really what that means. So with that preamble, I want to introduce you to what I call as the value realization framework for modernization. Just for the ease of discussion, and I'm happy to indulge in questions and comments and discussions on this, right? I've divided the framework into like 4 aspects. Okay, if you want to call it steps, you can call it that. And I will also in the next few charts walk you through a specific example and then apply this framework to that specific example. When we say we now got what the market is asking for, we kind of understand the broad landscape of how the application estate is out there. This is reality, right? That's how the application estates are. How do I think about modernization where I can maximize the value realization? Okay. The first aspect is to understanding the business imperatives on our application estate. What that means is I have 1,000 applications. Are each of these applications equal in terms of business criticality? How many of these applications drive a large part of my revenue? How many of these applications are actually supporting products and services that I sell that are actually strategic versus applications that support products and services that you might sunset in the next 12 to 18 months? If you don't understand that, if you just take in a view of, okay, I have 1,000 applications, I'm going to embark on a containerization journey, you could do that. You can still gain some infrastructure and other types of savings, but is that the way we need to think when we say, I want maximization of my value over a longer period of time, not a tactical decision? This framework speaks to a strategic imperative of large enterprises. So anyway, so the context is understanding our application workloads, criticality of them, and the relevance to business and revenue. And then, more importantly, redundancy in capabilities. Especially when we analyze large portfolios of applications, typical applications, the way the estate grows over time, change of management, somebody has a different priority, somebody has a different choice of a technology. Therefore, you add redundancy within your capability catalog, right? The second aspects that we have seen is around mergers and acquisitions. Many of our clients in different industries go through M&As. When you do that, integration is there, but people don't usually spend the necessary time in cleaning up everything, just because it's so much pressure on the generating value, because you have put a business case together and you have hit those measures, right? So when you do those types of integrations, you create more and more redundancy of capabilities. There's other ways, because some of the businesses are actually governed and they're marketed based on specific services and products. And what happens is each of these product lines and services build their own estate, build their own types of data sources, systems of records. And many of those data points could be redundant, right? So embark some type of a modeling exercise to look at that type of synergies, and rationalizing is key before we do any of the other types of modeling. So optimization of the estate is really the takeaway from that, right? You optimize your estate, understand rationalization impact. Now you have a subset of the estate that you want to modernize. Then you understand in the second aspect of it, some of the applicable technology patterns to this. There are several patterns, but the good thing is they are finite, right? I mean, it's it's manageable, the manageable number of patterns, right? And I'll give you some very concrete examples, right? You have specific workloads that do certain things as middleware components, as data store components, as integration components. Some of them are packaged application components. Some of them are mainframe components. Those are known, I would say, like the application estate patterns. And then what is a pathway for each of these components? While there are multiple options, again, they are all finite, handful of them, manageable. If I want to containerize some of these components, what are my target state options, right? I could put it in a Dockerized type of an environment. I could leverage either a community Kubernetes type container management platform, or use OpenShift, or use one of the available service on public clouds, and a pathway for that is also fairly manageable, right? There are only so many different ways that you can do that, right? And so there are estimation models that support each of these patterns. There are assets and accelerators that support each of these patterns on how to do it. There are also specific testing strategies, performance implications, and security implications for each of these patterns. And so that's what I mean by a holistic view of understanding those patterns and the transformation journey to get to the targets. Okay? Now, having done that, the next aspect is, okay, now I understood the patterns, I know how to convert, I know I have all of these tools and assets, right? Am I gaining the maximum value just by implementing those patterns? The answer is no. You have to do other things for that specific pattern modernization to be successful, or to gain the best value. So typically these are engineering practices that make it necessity, that makes it a must-haves, if you will, for some of the 2B patterns to be successful. For example, if you are a monolith application and then you embark on a microservices architecture decomposition as your target state, and you containerize them, what are the necessary engineering practices to realize the maximum value? Well, if you don't have a fairly mature, I would say, DevSecOps is probably a very broad philosophy, but CI/CD aspects of it. If you don't have a mature CI/CD program and a practice, you can microservices enable as much as you want. You're not gaining anything. If you don't have the ability to perform chaos engineering, you don't know what you don't know. If you don't have deep telemetry or advanced telemetry implemented, so even though you have the capability of being zero down, you're actually not doing it because you've not leveraged all of the other capabilities that you need to. How about the team structure? Now that you're doing it in a different way, the paradigm is different. Are you aligned well enough to actually support the new paradigm and the new architecture and gain the maximum value? So all of these, I would say, ancillary imperatives becomes important in what I call it as a third stage here. I'm also saying it's a maturity level because it's not about all or nothing. It's not about you don't do it or you don't do it at all. It's a different shades of gray, right? You're doing it, each of these engineering practices at certain level, at a certain maturity level. So typically, for each of these engineering practices, there are maturity models available. How good are you at release management versus how well do you do chaos engineering? Some people don't call it chaos engineering, but they may already be doing enough testing for many of their components that are in a highly available configuration, for example, shaking those up, keeping baselines and benchmarks and that type of stuff. Performance engineering, for example. When we typically do any of the target state architectures in the modernized space, more than often, they're all distributed, right? So how do you know, or how do you manage your performance implications from where you were? Well, there are many techniques and engineering practices and tools to support that. However, you also have to understand baselining, right? Like when you create a component, when you create a microservice, it should be in your DNA to draw down a performance baseline for that component itself. Now, and people might argue, well, that's in my development environment. The environments are not the same. The workload, like the payload is not the same. That's fine. But you can assume certain things, and within the parameters that you are actually testing under, here is the baseline for each of these service components, instead of waiting for a overall performance testing to tell you what works or what won't. Again, I'm speaking of level of maturity, right? Same with security. Secure engineering practices. How many of us have gotten caught, 2 weeks before deployment because the security team came, they ran either a penetration testing or some other type of testing, and 15 things came out which are no-nos. To be honest, in my experience, most of the things were avoidable. Now, there are certain things that come about in the ability to mimic, which happens rarely, but it does happen. I'll grant you those edge cases. But I would say 85, 90% of what falls out were avoidable. So practicing secure engineering, secure coding, secure design, like those types of practice areas become relevant. I've seen so many instances where sensitive information on URLs, because somebody were practicing that and we didn't have the necessary time enablement and it crept through, right? So again, basic things like that, right? So that's why I say the different shades of gray, maturity levels for each of these areas should be defined, gaps identified, enablement plans set up. If you want to bring in new tools, this is a time to do that. If you want to hire new engineering resources, this is a time to do that. And this is a time, because when knowing this body of work, what does this help? Ultimately, it's the overall total cost of ownership. Just because I modernized, I didn't think about these things now, they are going to add to your costs too. That's why I am relating this to value. At the end of the day, it's not just about what technology. Understand, just by doing A, there are B, C, and D around that is impacted, and they do cost me. Now, they may all be valuable, which is true in most cases, but it's about knowing as much as we can to make intelligent decisions. The last part of this framework is around the measure. Somebody asked me in my previous conversations, what's the difference between KPIs and OKRs? We'll not get into that, but I'm just, you're going to have some specific objectives as a framework, and you're going to have specific measures that you want to measure yourself on. The question is, do you have, what are you measuring today in your application state? Does the same thing make sense when you're in a target state? More than likely not. So what are the different measures? What are the meaningful measures? You don't have to measure things just for the heck of measuring, and people do that all the time, right? How do you optimize that? How do you measure it? How frequently do you measure it? Who are the personas that are interested in different types of a measure? A CIO is interested at a much more higher level measures than a development manager, for example. And at the end of this presentation, and if you don't get to this, you can look at the charts when it's distributed. I present you a framework for KPIs by persona, who may be interested in what, and that's really important, right? So tailoring the roadmap from the current state to the desired state, understanding the measures and objectives for each area that we determine. So this, in my view, gives you a complete sort of a thinking in terms of modernization, right? Understanding your portfolio and business imperatives, analyzing the as-is and the to-be technology patterns and the associated pathways, assets, models to get there. What are the ancillary type of things that actually broaden the value realization of each of those patterns in terms of engineering capabilities, team structures, and others? And lastly, the measures. What are the meaningful measures, how we measure them, and how we broadcast them? I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to skip through a few things over here to keep up with time. And hopefully I'll get to I'm able to spend about 5 or 6 minutes on an example, right? So let's look at some of the transformation patterns itself, right? So this is a very broad view. By the way, it is not holistic. So, just take it as an illustrative. When you want to compute overall TCO, you look at your application estate. And the way I have this is, you have some portable workloads on the left-hand side over here that speak to, like you're going to have your WebSphere or JBoss or .NET applications. And then you also have in the core applications that we talked about, you are going to have some applications. They could be CICS, COBOL-based applications. They're always going to have some degree of COTS in many enterprises, not so much in newer born on the cloud type applications. They leverage mostly best of the breed solution as a service capabilities. Data, but data and integration to me are the most challenging modernization pieces of the estate. There are 100 different reasons for that. Data stores are, for whatever reason, less optimized in our client's enterprise than the other application stack. Mainly because it's difficult. You can't, the criticality of that is so high that people don't tend to touch those. Same with integration. I have seen batch jobs that have been running for the past 30 years in enterprises. People say it works, so they let it fly, right? But the business imperatives, as we saw early on, more and more real-time transactions are expected. So there is, that need for that type of a modernization, right? So there are other things over here that I will not deep dive, but understanding the landscape and from a solutioning standpoint, okay, now I know the landscape standpoint. So I have a much more granular view than this, but I'll just spend a few seconds on this, right? You're always going to have certain things after having, by the way, I'm assuming now that I've already done my business criticality and rationalization models. Then only I am getting to my patterns, right? What I can migrate like for like, whether it is a virtualized type, local data center to another data center versus a public cloud. What I have seen in the past 12 to 18 months is a lot of our clients are embarking on data center exit strategies. And therefore, when we speak to some of the modernization, they want to do, just help me get it off the data centers first. And you can still help me through rationalization and other types of modernization later on. That's not what my framework is saying, but it is a likely scenario. It is actually a practical scenario. Does it make sense overall from a TCO? It could. We have to do the TCO analysis. It could, because there is a lot of benefits to be gained just by exiting out existing data centers, both from infrastructure as well as the support services standpoint. So I just want to, state that, right? This is not the only way of thinking. Clients are thinking differently too, and there is value in that too. So some steps might get flipped based on what you want to do. A migration with remediation, some people actually do remediation as part of the migration because they potentially have a little bit more time to exit from wherever they are. Some people have leases that are expiring and they don't want to extend the lease of their data centers. So they're like, get me out of here. We'll think about other, like modernization, containerization, other types of modernization later, right? Monolith to microservices is something that I've seen a lot. API enablement of existing legacy capabilities, I would say, is more of a tactical or an interim solution, while people think of much more, let me break this monolith, reconstruct them into best of the breed solutions. Some I build, some I buy, that type of pattern exists, right? So I want to showcase a few examples over here. For example, for portable workloads, if you're looking at let's just say, WebSphere type deployment, typically you have patterns. This is not a all exhaustive catalog. I'm just giving you some illustrative examples, right? So you could take it and put it on a OpenShift container platform on a Liberty runtime, for example. I have seen patterns from an Oracle going into either a Postgres type of a situation where possible, or other as a service type of a pattern, right? I mean, I can click through a few more things over here, but I'm just giving you some examples of the likely patterns that we see when we get into a deeper dive of the application components itself, right? Now, addressing the ancillary elements. Now we understood the patterns. there are certain productivity levers that you may want to assess and figure out the gaps to supplement the modernization itself. I am giving you some very high-level ones that I have seen. Again, not very exhaustive, but good enough in my view. Especially when we look at distributed workloads, when we are looking at broad cross business unit type release management becomes an extremely difficult situation. Also, if you're trying to use best of the breed solutions from different vendors and different public cloud providers, release management is a nightmare. So if the organizations don't have a even if we just say the maturity levels to be low, medium, and high, somewhere between medium and high is where you need to be to really implement that type of solutions, right? Continuous monitoring or advanced telemetry for that matter, right? Again, I have seen traditionally when we are in a much more of a traditionalized infrastructure and environments, you have basic instrumentation, but advanced instrumentation with a lot of self-healing and self-scaling type capabilities don't exist. And if we don't if we don't get to that level of a maturity, that modernization journey is pointless. It doesn't help. Quality engineering is not a new thing, again, but I'm talking about newer ways of infusing quality, right? Coming up with more and more of a automated way of delivering capabilities, including continuous testing as part of your CI/CD pipe, if you will. Infusing elements of performance, security, and chaos engineering as early as possible. So you test out everything. You're testing out your distributed baseline in terms of response times. You're making sure you're checking the box of compliance, audit requirements for the industry, and other types of things which otherwise gets added on as a phase in the very extreme right-hand side. And shake out the topology. Do you even have the right topology for the types of volumetrics that we are looking at? So those are the types of things that we will have to think through, especially when we are going to be in a distributed type of a modernized view, right? I spoke briefly about culture and organizational constructs. This is a very, very difficult part of this entire equation. I'm not going to deep dive on this because I think that warrants a separate session by itself. In fact, me and my team, we are actually working through a couple of very large clients right now on figuring out an integrated operating model for their teams in the cloud world. That's really all we are doing, right? Looking at the current squads, how they operate, and what are the pitfalls and current issues that we see, and coming up with a pathway of an integrated squad that A, cost optimizes, and B, solves the current problems. Many of these are problems because of isolations and the silos that people have built in. And also, people start using different tools. It's not integrated. There is not one seamless dashboard for seeing anything. Problem management and associated, ITIL processes requires a level of maturity to be successful in the modernized world. Otherwise, the TCO that we created is just on paper. You will never realize it. Without having the right types of the organizational and team construct, you will not realize whatever TCO that we jotted down on paper, right? I'm mentioning SREs, which many of you are probably familiar or are going to be familiar if we are going to be working in this space more and more. Tech debt mitigation, it's an interesting one because I've been challenged by many purists that tech debt should be part of your operate or a manage of your application estate. Quite likely, I don't disagree with that. My notion, my philosophy is slightly different. To me, a continuous tech debt mitigation is a institutionalized program that is continually happening along with your sprints. If you're embarking on 6 sprints on specific release, where you usually have like the last sprint for some technology issues, platform issues, the tech debt backlog should be part of it. And again, my notion, again, it's been my personal experience. This is how I live my life anyway, right? Like I don't like debt. I want to pay off whatever I can pay off as early as I can. And some, it's the same thing has to be applied from a technology standpoint, right? Many of the modernization stories fail or don't have decent enough business cases because of the level of debt that we have with many of our application estates. It's mind-boggling. I have seen mission critical data stores and integration footprint that have no support from a platform standpoint, end of support, but still they exist, right? How do you modernize those? People, they're so scared even to touch them, right? So to me, continuous tech debt mitigation program is part and parcel of your continuous modernization story. So it has to be part of it. There are some exemplars here. I don't think I have enough time to go through each of these illustrations, but I'm going to submit this for your review. There is a quality engineering illustration and what happens. I wouldn't worry too much about the staff reduction. And this is all illustrative. If you do certain things well, there is a potential for reducing some of the headcount. I had, again, I had presented this to a specific type of an audience. I'm submitting it over here. I would focus more on the opportunity from a productivity lever standpoint. There is usually a range of productivity that you can gain for each of these engineering practices, depending on how mature you are to begin with, right? Similarly, there is something for continuous monitoring, SRE, that type of stuff, right? So I have constructed a view here. If you typically, if you do certain things, there is a typical type of value realization that you can get actually quantifiable value realization. I'm providing sort of like a range here, and I would say for most of the patterns that I have seen, those ranges manifest itself. Again, my hypothesis has been very clear. When we have to do everything. You can't just do I containerized it and that's why I'm expecting. You can't. You have to go through each of the steps that I articulated in order to maximize the value of the transformation itself. So this is a view of again a slightly different view. I'm just trying to connect this to the technology patterns that we talk through. I think I'll spend maybe the next 5-6 maybe minutes to walk through a scenario, and then probably open up for questions. So let's take a quick scenario, right? This is a made-up scenario, okay? So there is an insurance company that are looking to have an ability to do real-time, straight-through processing of claims rather than relying on a time-consuming batch processes with much better multi-channel digital user experience for higher client satisfaction and market differentiation. That's a mouthful, but it really covers a large gamut of the expectations that our clients have. This is, fairly, I would say, commonplace that folks may want to do this, right? So let's look at some operative words over here, right? Straight through processing, near real time or real time straight through processing. So that says, okay, my integration perhaps is a challenge, right? Much better multi-channel digital experience. So that means that I have some sort of a client experience today, which is, uni-channel or, not as exhaustive as what our clients are asking today. And earlier I gave you the example, right? I could start the claims on a web browser. I could go update on a mobile, and I could be using some other type of a device to actually, iPads or whatever to manage my claims processing. People do that all the time, right? And people don't even finish up the claims that they open up on a specific device and finish it in some other type of a device. That also calls for, higher client sat when they can do that. And for providers of the insurance, that is a market differentiator, right? So anyway, that's the client scenario. Just to recap steps, these are the steps that we want to follow. So if we apply these steps to this specific scenario, right? Again, this is a context of the client scenario, right? Typically, perhaps there is a portal. There is a bunch of business services that's supporting the claims processing today. There is a integration architecture in place. I'm just calling it a bus, but it's overall integration architecture. since the problem definition spoke to that I need straight-through processing, it looks like they have a bunch of batchiness. There is some messaging type thing. Apparently, there is some type of a external system, either doing some whatever the insurance use case happens to be in this case, and that's being accomplished through a file transfer. This is fairly typical, by the way. This is illustrative, but this is fairly typical. And the ABCD on the business services basically tell us that there are a wide number of business services available. Okay, so what do we do first? Let's analyze the capabilities and figure out how relevant they are. Just going back to the model, the framework, right? So this is a very complicated view, but if you actually read through every one of those, it actually makes sense, because what I'm trying to do is I am understanding application dimensions for each of the capabilities, each of the components within an application. I want to map those components to a capability and see if a capability is actually doing some kind of an aggregation. Is it updating a specific type of a data store? What types of upstream and downstream is this component actually interfacing with? And are there other similar components that are doing something similar components, right? So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to get to is how important these components are. How many of other components that I have that is in the related areas of mapping, and do I have synergies between them so I can optimize them better? So this model actually lets me do that, and here's an example of a implementation of that model. What this is doing here is, at the end of the day, just to net it out, right? I've compared components over here that is doing access and transformation, what happens to be a capability, right? ABCD and CMS over here, and when I do the weighted averages, basically the match here corresponds to a similarity coefficient between those two components, and I can drop a rule that says, look, if the similarity coefficient is over 70, that's prime candidates for rationalizing. That means one of them has to be retired, the other has to pick up the necessary gaps of the capability, or the business process itself has to be tweaked. So they just leverage the one capability instead of having multiple capabilities. And some of the roles that has been compared, collation of data, consumption of data, some sort of processing. This is all flexible depending on what we are trying to analyze. The net of this is analyzing the components for similarities and grouping, so we know I can actually consolidate and rationalize. That's the first step towards this. And then I'm applying steps 3, 4, and 5 in a single view over here. I looked at the mapping that was provided and say, okay, look, if I see this, I can potentially, after having analyzed, if I really need all ABCD, as well as subcomponents within the integration, I can then subdivide this into, look, I just need this pattern. I want to take the batch integrations and perhaps leverage Cloud Paks on Kubernetes stack, and have some Kafka event streams for doing like an event-driven architecture. And in some of the data stores that I am able to consolidate, perhaps I can leverage an as a service system in one of my public clouds. So I quickly can decompose that into potential modernization patterns, for which I now understand, okay, for these patterns, here are some specific engineering practices that I need a level of maturity to be successful. I go do some gap analysis on these, and I figure out I need additional tools. I need to send my team to a 2-week boot camp. I need to hire a couple of SREs, whatever the case might be, right? And then I figure out, look, the business imperatives were for me to have straight-through processing. So the measures that I'm going to be evaluated on, many of the claims are failing the straight-through processing per month. Is there an uptick in the customer NPS? Number of hours elapsed between end-to-end claims processing, because the whole thing is that I want to accelerate my claims processing. That was a business problem. from a technology standpoint, I want to understand when I do the releases in this new modernized patterns, what are the number of defects that I'm seeing per release? MTTR is like a older type of a measure that's still relevant. So again, this is illustrative. I'm not making it very, very comprehensive, but I want to submit how we actually implement the framework, understanding a specific business problem and actually running it through. It makes sense when we actually look at an example and walk through it. And I will suggest when you go back and look at your application estate and want to do something like this, if you follow the framework, it makes it a lot more structured, meaningful, and the chances of being successful is higher. And that's really what I want to submit to you today, right? With that, I'm going to pause here. I think I'm good with time to take some questions. I said that I was going to show you an exemplar of like a KPI framework. The letters over here designate specific type of personas that may be interested in a type of KPI, depending on whether we are doing foundational work, some architecture work, deployment work, or whether it is some of the cultural aspects, right? So I'm going to take a pause over here. I'm going to get back to the chat and see if there are any questions that I can address.
Thank you, Sunil. That was awesome. So I think right now we don't have any questions, but we can just give it a few seconds and see if anyone has anything. All right. So first question that come through is this framework open source and available in GitHub?
Look, I'm presenting this in an open forum now, so it is. I have constructed this, I would say, in the last 4 or 5 months based on experiences of having done this in so many places. I'm going to take you up on that. I'm going to post it in one of the GitHubs, and I will, perhaps through the Konveyor forum, we publish it.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me see if I have anything else here for you. Right, Sunil, I think that's it, man.
Okay.
It looks like that was a lot of great content. To everyone else, I'll send you the recording and the slides once I get that uploaded, either later today or early tomorrow morning. Sunil, is there anything else that, in case people want to get in touch with you or?
I think my LinkedIn is posted on the charts. I'm also available on Twitter. I'm going to send that in the chat over here, and I am happy to answer any questions. I like a lively debate. I like to be challenged. So feel free to engage in that discussions. Right? This is just a point of view. There's no right or wrong answers, but let's all as a community develop this and make this a little better, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Sunil, for presenting and sharing all these insights with us. Everyone else, hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Ciao.
Thank you.